Howdy. Did Michaela want a reminder? Or is she on vacation?
I am not sure. I do not believe that she is on vacation, but I'm not sure.
I don't think she monitors Slack very much. I wonder how we would ping her. Probably should have pinged her earlier. Like, it'd be rude to ping her now. Hey, why aren't you here? I'm sure she's going to love this part of the recording too. Quit focusing on me. Dr. OSCAL. Maybe I'll edit this out. I don't know. Let's see. We had somewhat of an agenda for the day. For the meeting. Do we want to stick with that? Anything else come up that might trump the agenda? Nope. All right. So Jen and chat had made a suggestion for a deliverable. Wanted to make sure like we're all on the same page and it makes sense. So maybe we should just start about discussing what that might look like, what we could deliver.
Cool. I can start. Just kind of what brought me to that conclusion and why I proposed it. So on the Slack thread, Michaela had actually added an existing OSCAL REST API. It's created by Easy Dynamics. It's powering the OSCAL IO registry. So I think that, and there's some issues. Do you mind if I share my screen? I think it might be easier to visualize a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share this issue. That's a little on the old side, but there has been some desire. There's another issue, I believe, to get some norms around how to exchange OSCAL information. And towards the bottom, the API created by Easy Dynamics is mentioned. But there's a lot of good information here on this issue, and I can post in the notes a little bit later about the use cases that folks are looking to see. And there's also a mention of cloud events as a possible approach to use in the cloud native space. So I figured that would, this being a CNCF group, that would be what we were targeting, is how do we use OSCAL in the cloud native space. So this might not be all encompassing. That might be why it doesn't exactly fit with OSCAL, because this is just specific for cloud native use and it might not apply everywhere else. So I want to also show the REST API a little bit. Hopefully I'm not misquoting, but in the OSCAL mini workshop where this API was shown, the presenter compared it to Docker Hub. So like the Docker Hub for OSCAL, which made me think that, that means that the API, it might be similar to the OCI distribution spec, and with OSCAL being the manifest. And this could be, and this is using a REST API. So that makes sense as a distribution spec, you would expect that to be synchronous. So So the API I was proposing was actually maybe something more along the lines of the runtime spec. Like, here's how you distribute OSCAL documentation between two storage or servers that are storing OSCAL documentation. And this is how clients would interact with that. But then how do you use OSCAL to achieve specific outcomes, like automated assessment might be something that can't really be done synchronously. So you might not want to use a REST API for that. You might want to use something else like cloud events with the event-driven architecture there, or like gRPC, or and have it in protocol buffers. So this is kind of my thought process behind that. So I just wanted to share it and maybe get your thoughts on it, see what we could do with it. Maybe there's a specific area we should tackle first that makes sense. So yeah.
From a facilitator point of view, looking at this, I'm most interested in this conversation because if we can decide on we're going to do one of these things, or we're going to do all of them, or we're going to do whatever the case may be, that advances being able to define our issue in GitHub more, so that we can get closer to this is what's going on with this group, which makes it easier to pull other people in, or other way around, makes it easy for other people to decide, oh, that is something I want to be involved in, and then as well, it makes it easier for us to eventually present to the security tag on that's what this project is, for them to go, yes.
Yeah, I'd agree. I like the general idea of the possibilities, but I can't say that I've personally like enumerated all of what those could be, and then how that relates to this overarching discussion on trying to establish like norms across something like the CNCF.
You looked like you wanted to say something, Jay, but I was.
So yeah, like, so if we're saying this is the way out of, there's multiple ways in how you can structure a document, an OSCAL document, but we're creating some norms. Would the norms then be expressed as like, if it was REST, this is, we expect it to look like this. And so it's more constrained than what OSCAL says you can do. Is that's the, like, I'm just picking on the REST part, that's where we're getting to express the norm. So it's not just like, it's the norm of like, this is how the documents are put together, but also then like like you were talking about later, it's besides the REST, for being able to process things like create a assessment result or assessment plan, the interactions, and so that also feeds into the way we would expect the exchanges to happen. So that's the sum total of the norms. So those are the two places we would be targeting, being able to define the norms. I felt like out of everything you said, Jen, it might not be we choose one. Like, we don't just choose protobuf, or we don't just choose REST or cloud events. So if we define what, like, if we pick on REST and we define the REST exchanges, or we do protobuf for for the asynchronous stuff. If we back it up though to like, this is just what's expected in the what would be sent and what would be returned, then it could be, there's the potential for it to be expressed in other technologies. Yes?
Right. Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's easier to start with, like, let's start with, at least I think, let's start with the REST. We do that, and then we pull the thing, like here it is as an example, a concrete example, but also here's the norms that we're expecting from there. These are the documents that have more constraints on them than the OSCAL spec itself. And so if you didn't want to do it in REST, you wanted to do that in some other technology, have at it. You want to do it in SOAP, go for it. Couldn't tell if you know what SOAP is, Jen.
I do.
So I'm sorry you do. Is it good enough then to say we would pick maybe 3? Do we do some cloud events, we do some protobuf and there's some REST, or do we do protobuf and like what?
I'll have to admit, I don't know a ton about cloud events. I do know that it is transport agnostic, so maybe looking at that might be helpful. On the issue itself, it looked like there was a desire to have something that was transport agnostic, kind of like what you're alluding to, Jay, where it could translate into multiple different technologies. I do think that for distribution, starting with REST just makes sense to me. Maybe just as a way to get our thoughts out in a structured way. But I understand what you're saying in having it in plain English is helpful. And that's why I shared the distribution spec, because I do believe that it's both. They have it done both ways. So it might be, if we were looking at it, it might just be a good guide or good thing to shoot for. I'm sure this is very comprehensive, but we could do something a bit simpler.
And then can you help me with the thread of how this relates to like the initial problem statement for this group of like kind of like establishing this delivery mechanism kind of sounds like a separate layer than maybe some of the earlier discussion, which was more focused on like the structure of the actual OSCAL itself and establishing like, again, norms around things like deterministic UUID generation or other items that live within the OSCAL, props that could be commonly used, and or how a tool and or maybe many tools integrates with the internals of OSCAL for sake of like standardization for people producing OSCAL. Like if we back all the way up to whoever this persona is that is writing the OSCAL, they don't have anything to deliver yet. There is no mechanism interface yet available because their OSCAL doesn't exist. Is part of this group still like targeting that recommendation of like, here's how you would structure your OSCAL to be meaningful from an open source project perspective?
Yeah, I was looking at this as being able to define like the exchange or the cloud. If we go with the cloud events, I was peeking at it for a second. It does look like that would be a good place to, like, if we do cloud events, then we could do other things like the rest of that. Like, so the cloud events would be the, if I understood correctly from my quick peeking at it, would be the way that we could define, this is how we would use OSCAL, structure a document so that we're all doing it the same way. I don't know though, like the UID stuff and determining that. I don't know of a way to enforce that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think from like a project perspective of like what does a project maintainer do if they want to be involved in trying to express their compliance of their project or of anything, right? STIGs run against their project, or anything that could be represented in OSCAL run against their project. And when I think about the transport layer, I kind of think of dependencies of some kind of infrastructure existing. And maybe that's not exactly what you need in order to express what we're discussing here, as far as like just how the exchange happens, which could be agnostic. But at the same time, I don't know. I keep going back to just like the simplest form of a text file, an OSCAL artifact in a repository. How do you make that meaningful? And maybe again, that I'm only raising this just to say is like, is that still within scope?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I even thought about this as like, you might structure it differently depending on the context, and having the API helps establish context of
Yeah.
I'm doing this and it looks like this when I do this action.
Yeah.
That was kind of my intent.
I think this could be even enforced. You could look at it like a linter. So if like we're using our repository for where we're storing documents, like you're talking about, is Git, and we have a GitHub action or a hook or whatever, and or even just forget about a Git. I guess I just have a file locally, and I can use a linter to see, that uses what we were talking about, like the cloud event definitions, to say is this document good? Yes, it is, or no, we have problems here. So I think it could even apply there. I don't know that that was ever an intention for cloud events, but I don't see why it couldn't work that way. Or maybe I'm just exposing my ignorance.
No, I think that sounds fair. I think really just wrapping my mind around all the possibility, because there's a large breadth of trying to express why OSCAL in the beginning, and then tell that story with the full through line to here's how it works. Here's the end-to-end workflow. All of that is obviously to be determined. But yeah, I got a little lost on the exchange, like where the exchange process fits into the greater discussion. So this is helping.
I even wonder, like, does some of the difficulty stem around adopters not quite knowing where to start, or the typical workflows that occur when using OSCAL, and if this could be helpful there?
Yeah, I think the context part that you're talking about, Jen, makes it less abstract.
Mm-hmm.
Sex in the workflow, you're doing this. This is, yeah.
Yeah, no, I really like that discussion. It leads to a lot of like different avenues for how would somebody who does not know what OSCAL is get started, and what do they need to be aware of. And I think if you start all the way back at like the authoritative source of truth. Somebody has written a catalog, right? And at the end of the day, that could be like a CNCF OSCAL catalog. Here is what the CNCF dictates as best practices for projects. And they lay out groups of controls or controls, whatever that looks like, right? If you wanted somebody to digest that and then start to say, well, here's how I do, salsa, because salsa was recommended as a best practice. And here's my attestation that you could go and check and whatnot. Like, how do you get from point A of the authoritative source to B of they have something that they have generated as a implementation of that? I kind of see them maybe as a component definition. I think we could kind of maybe make some stretches there, but like I think there's a story of just the text artifacts themselves, and then what are we going to try to do with them, which could be linting them for validation and or checking for provenance within a repo, and then downstream implications. And that could also be where exchange comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know exactly what all we want to tackle in that process, right? Like if you want to do catalog authoring and that within the CNCF, that's probably one initiative. If you want to do the implementation of consuming that and putting it against a project, laying out guidelines for doing that is another area to explore.
You remember the Miro diagram?
Yeah.
I wonder if we could use activities in there as opportunities for where we would define, like, are all the exchanges defined on there, and chunk them up and say, so it could even be by persona, like these personas are doing these activities. So we have these cloud event specs for them, and, do the same for, I guess, by the different layers. And then we could take another pass after we've done the cloud events for those things, and maybe do simplistic example implementations that help, further illustrate that, so that the tooling community can look at that and say, oh, I understand now how, like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to tackle. Or people just in compliance, not necessarily developers or anything like that. Oh, I understand now. This is how I would be able to use OSCAL to get my job done. And open source projects would be able to say, oh, this is where I need to put my stuff here for whatever compliance frameworks that I want to target. I have been hoping at some point there could be an open source effort community around creating OSCAL catalogs.
Yeah.
I have been wondering, I don't know, like, I think I was to pick on, like, CIS benchmarks. I think, for example, we wouldn't, you have to accept a EULA to get at. Like, it's not redistributable. So,
yep.
Like, I don't think we'd be able to do that one, for example. So I don't know if others are, like, talking about PCI DSS, like, I'm not sure what the licensing is around that one. Could we, so I wonder if there are opportunities for that And if I think, well,
Yeah, I just wanted to switch and show you that there is, I believe this is an ongoing effort, but this is the CIS OSCAL catalog.
ooh, ooh.
And then maybe to be also like, you all might have already seen this, but John Zola, who attends the
Mhm.
compliance meetings, he kind of runs like the controls, the cloud native security controls catalog repo,
Mhm.
which dissected one of the white papers that Tag Security, I believe, produced, and then basically turned that into a catalog. And so that's another kind of, I guess, additional layer, which is like, rather than regulatory standard, like take a white paper full of best practices and produce a catalog from that as well.
I wonder how yeah. Okay, so if we go back to, maybe we should, between now and the next meeting, homework, let's look at cloud events and see if that's a good place to start. So, meaning like if it, let's say it is, then we could work out like what are the events that we would, I assume that's the right verbiage. What are the events that we want to define, or the specs that we want to define? And that could be our first, like, let's put that in the GitHub issue for this project. And I'm not saying that would be the entire, that's the entirety of the output for the project, but it's a good start. Like, we are going to do this, and then like look back at what you were saying, Brant. Like, does that, when we were first the beginning, or like what is already in the ticket? Does that, how much is left that doesn't cover, and we can go back and then say, okay, what other outputs do we need to add to be able to make good on what brought us here in the first place?
Yeah, my own mental model wants to like ensure that I would know how to communicate to somebody external from our group if somebody came and asked. And right now, like, I think we've talked about a lot. So I think as a personal action item, like, I want to look back at the original Google Doc for like, here's the intent, and maybe like, if it hasn't been done already, not saying it hasn't, but like clean that up and say like, here is more refined intent after discussion. That would help me first and foremost before I actually start to dive into maybe some of the underlying specifics. And the OSCAL IO and just in general, the rest kind of implementation also piques my interest. And so, yeah, homework.
I think that would be really helpful for me as well, because one thing when you were talking, Jay, that I was thinking about is, based on the Miro you showed that I saw the recording of, maybe there's certain groups that we can talk to about what we're trying to do, like catalog authoring groups or component suppliers, and maybe we get more interest in a particular area, and that might tell us where to go first. So if we can communicate to these groups, this is what we're trying to do, it would probably be more successful.
Yeah, I hear you. Like inviting some guest speakers. They're not really guest speakers, but some guest potential, maybe the CIS people that were on the repo that you were showing earlier from CIS, the people that had committed there. Maybe we invite them to come, we get an agenda together and we're kind of interview them like, hey, what if this is what we were thinking? What if, can you join us in a hypothetical conversation? What if we did this? What if it looked like that?
Another thing is I do believe there is a representative from CIS that attends the compliance working group meetings. So that might be a good place to advertise or start.
Mm-hmm. And then, we can do the same thing with the other personas or roles in the Miro diagram going along. So. I feel like I'm getting out over my skis. I'm going to use that a lot now, Jim, that you didn't, I introduced that saying to her the other day. So I'm too far out on the branch.
It's too far out on your skis, meaning like, let's make sure that we understand intent and how to communicate, then look at underlying technology options like cloud events.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. If you're snow skiing and you lean too far forward, then you'll fall over. Or I think there's a tree analogy with a branch, and you go too far out on the branch and the branch snaps. So, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I think we're talked out. I think we got homework to do. All right. Well, have a good day.
Likewise.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.